Hello and welcome to 21st Century Vitalism. This is a podcast exploring how we can best maintain a sense of energy, inspiration, and wakefulness while navigating the unique stressors of the modern age. My name is Brett Kane, and I'll be your host on this journey as we engage in conversation with a wide variety of speakers who represent different worldviews and practices to help us achieve this aim. This typically includes esteemed spiritual teachers, somatic therapists, artists, environmentalists, and activists. Each of these folks hold a potential key to the puzzle of embodying more deeply in these often challenging and uncertain times. Joining us on the show this week is a licensed marriage and family therapist, Bruce Tift. Having been in private practice since 1979, Bruce has helped thousands of clients come home to themselves in an effort to relate better to their hang-ups and to those around them. On top of his private practice, Bruce has been a practitioner of Vajrayana Buddhism for the past 40 years, which heavily influences his approach to the practice of psychotherapy. Having had the great fortune of training under the Tibetan meditation master Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche, Bruce went on to teach at Naropa University for 25 years. In this conversation, we explore some of the themes he outlines in his book, Already Free, Buddhism Meets Psychotherapy on the Path to Liberation. Namely, we discuss the nature of neuroses, embodied emotional vulnerability, and self-aggression. It's a very rich conversation that I'm frankly still integrating, even as I record this intro. So I trust that it will surely spin some of your heads and leave you with a lot to contemplate. If you want to continue studying this line of thinking, consider picking up a copy of Bruce's book wherever you get your books. If you want to support this show, head on over to patreon.com/21st Century Vitalism and consider signing up. If money is tight, I understand. You're also welcome to subscribe over on YouTube, follow us on Instagram, or like us on Facebook. Any and all interaction is a huge help. So thank you so much for listening and for getting involved. Without further ado, please sit back, drink some tea, maybe do some stretches, and most importantly, open your heart for Bruce Tift. Right. So Bruce, hello. Welcome to the show. The train is now leaving the station. I just want to start by saying thank you so much for giving me some of your time. How are you doing today?
Pretty good. It's we're on the Central Coast, so it's a nice foggy morning. I love the alternation here between the being able to see the ocean and then it gets foggy and back and forth. So it's very nice here.
Oh, that's makes for a really good conversational atmosphere. I like that. Yeah. So, just for a little bit of background about, my contact with your work, I recently had you shared with me through my roommate who had read your book Already Free quite some years ago, and he was really impacted by it. And he recently reread it and was just telling me about it. So I went off of his recommendation and I got the audiobook. And I spent the last month and a half really going through it multiple times at this point. So your voice is kind of imprinted into my brain at this point. So
Sorry.
It's always fun. Yeah, no, it's perfectly fine. But I read a lot of Dharma books as somebody who practices, and I found this year your book has been maybe the most impactful. There's just so many pithy little messages in there that are now lodged very squarely into my mind. And so thank you for writing that piece and your life of practice and sharing this with people. It really is tremendously helpful.
Great. Well, I'm glad you're doing your version of trying to be a benefit to others too.
Yeah, that's all I can do is try.
Well, that's all any of us can do.
Yeah. So, I want to introduce, my listeners to you properly. So I want to give you an opportunity to just share a little bit of your background on how you found yourself at this crossroads of Western psychotherapy and Buddhist thought. Just maybe like how you got into them and how you figured out that these were pretty useful for each other.
Well, basically, I don't know. Anything I say I'll be making up, but I don't mind making things up. Everything I say I make up. But the story would be that in my mid-20s, Vietnam was going on. I took off out of the country, um, was traveling for about 2 years on my motorcycle around Europe, North Africa, overland to India and Nepal. And I had been in a clinical psych program. That's one of the things I was sort of running away from, what I ran into as far as the Western idea about how to be of help to people, how mind works. And in India and Nepal, I ran into a number of Tibetan refugee communities. I was able to just uh, sit in on talks with the Dalai Lama and Dharamsala, and studied for a little while with a Nyingma teacher, or maybe he's Gelugpa, Thupten Yeshi, and outside of Kathmandu. And I was just very profoundly affected by how sort of fresh and practical and deep that energy was. And when I came back to the States, I met Trungpa Rinpoche, actually at a Unitarian church where my family had sort of been a part of for quite a while, and ended up a couple years later in Boulder, Colorado, and um, reconnected with him when he moved his center there, and then actually re-entered uh, the study of therapy through um, uh, being a student at Naropa just in the first couple of years there. And then I ended up teaching there for about 25 years in different ways. So it was sort of like I just found Western therapy not resonant and Buddhism very resonant, but I was still interested in trying to understand my experience mostly at that point uh, with a therapeutic model. And so I would say just organically over many years, this was like I graduated in 79, so it's been about 45 years, I guess. Just organically, back and forth, I found how to hold both of those approaches in ways that made sense to me. And hopefully, it seems like have been helpful for some people. Nothing works for everyone.
Mm-hmm. So I want to ask about what about Buddhism you feel kind of fits really well with that model, but I'm also recognizing that some people who might not be practitioners might not really know what Buddhism is. I think the common conception is that it's a religion, right? Like we worship the Buddha, and it's a lot of people don't really have that experiential connection to what that is. So, how would you describe it to people who are
Well,
just
I'd say it's
unfamiliar?
maybe a little bit like asking what Christianity is. There's so many
Yeah.
sects, there's so many different opinions, and some of them contradictory. But um, my personal opinion is that probably about 98% of people involved with any tradition, whether it's Buddhism, Christianity, Islam, anything, Judaism, are using it as a religion, which means, people are trying to have a guideline for how to live a satisfying life, be decent people, find a community they can be part of, have some sense of um, I'm doing life right, things like that. And I'd say most Buddhists, as far as I can tell, treat it as a religion. I mean, some Buddhists pray to Buddha for color TV. Uh, and I'd say a very small percentage, I don't know, I'm just making it up, but maybe 2% of any tradition actually use it as a spiritual path. But I think the people who use any tradition as a spiritual path probably have more in common with each other than they do with the people who use that tradition as a religion. Um, I'm sure it's familiar, but somebody has said that religion provides answers and a spiritual path provides questions.
Mm-hmm.
So, a Buddhist uh, approach to a spiritual path, I think, is probably very similar in some ways at the essence to most other traditions' spiritual aspect. And it has to do with engaging with, I think, the fairly straightforward experience that life is a mystery. We don't know, uh, but at the same time, we can't take refuge in just saying, "Oh, it's all a mystery." I mean, there's this tension between wrestling with very important questions about what it is to be human, how to be a benefit rather than be a problem, and the possibility that we're never going to find an answer. But to me, that's what Buddhism, what has drawn me, especially to Vajrayana Buddhism, Tibetan Buddhism, is that um, in my understanding, there's no search for an answer. There's an encouragement to return to, let's say, openness, the experience of openness, not the idea, um, as sort of the most practical way to engage with this human experience that's so mysterious. Um, Another way of saying it is that I think this isn't Buddhist language especially, but I think that it makes sense in that tradition to train oneself to be the nature of question rather than looking for answer.
Mm.
And so, obviously, from a certain point of view, that's a little disturbing to commit to never having an answer to things. But I think it's actually a more accurate approximation of engaging with the complexity of life, nature, our human experiences.
Yeah. So, what about those qualities do you feel that Western psychotherapy maybe lacks or is requiring of those energies?
Well, Western therapy is an expression of Western culture. And Western culture, not to be too cliched, but it's very dualistic. It's good and bad, God and the devil, body and soul. And so Western therapy takes as a given that there is a significant, actually existent, continuing, objectively real self. And so, given that as just a basic assumption of Western culture, it makes sense to protect that self and improve that self. And it's not wrong, it's very intelligent. But a Buddhist view, I think, is that upon investigation, we're going to find an appearance of self, but we're never going to be able to get a hold of any actual objective existence of a self, or in the jargon, no essential nature to this appearance. And so I think Western therapy is very helpful in looking at patterns of experience as they persist from very young ages into adulthood. Buddhism has almost no appreciation of that. Western therapy is it only recently has started to really mm, investigate the nature of awareness. And obviously, Buddhism, that's sort of its specialty, is investigating the nature of open awareness.
Yeah. So, I mean, these things kind of seem kind of irreconcilable. It seems like as a psychotherapist, as somebody who is in private practice with clients who come to you, maybe with an understanding of how therapy works, how do you bring these things together and work with them in a way that invites people in and doesn't alienate them? And how do they go together?
Well, I don't have an agenda to not alienate people.
Love that.
I have an agenda to try to be of benefit, but nothing works for everyone. Um, but if somebody considers, let's say, analogously, an intimate relationship, uh, I don't think it's a very accurate or practical view that we're supposed to integrate ourselves with our partner. To me, healthy intimacy requires this never resolvable, provocative, disturbing alternation between the fact that we're all separate, personally responsible, existentially alone, and the fact that we all want to give and receive love, are completely interconnected on all sorts of levels. Um, there's no essential disconnection from life, but intimacy is not resolvable into either connection or separateness. But we learn to go back and forth. So let's say one simplistic view of healthy intimacy might be that this never resolvable alternation between self care and care for one's partner. And that alternation might be sort of at the heart of healthy intimacy. So, as an analogy, we don't have to integrate a Buddhist view and a Western view. It's an ongoing sort of engagement that never is going to have a resolution. But it
Mhm.
doesn't mean that there's not something very life giving and useful about that uh, willingness to participate in that disturbance.
Yeah. So, as somebody who has practiced Buddhism for quite some time, I think one of the things that many people expect when they go to therapy is to kind of talk about their histories. And as you alluded to a little bit earlier, this notion of this no fundamental nature or like emptiness of self. How do you integrate your personal view and experience of that into a therapeutic setting where people are expecting to like self-develop, self-understand? Do you just kind of set that aside and just kind of work in a relative level, or I guess how would
Well,
you?
hopefully, I have a modest degree of flexibility. So
Mhm.
that if I'm working with somebody, hopefully I can at least join their world a little bit. Uh, but I think for many people, it's very helpful to clarify our speculations because we can never know what our history is. It's so complex and our memories aren't that great. And um, I think it's very helpful to speculate about the origins of these patterns of experience because that's really what Western therapy looks at, patterns of experience, as opposed to a Buddhist view of always the fresh immediacy of our experience. But if somebody gets some clarity, oh gosh, this is how I experienced my parents, I can see familiar ways that they engage with themselves and with me. I didn't make all this up, you know? Geez, what was it like to have been born into these emotional systems, you know? And I think that often is helpful for some clarity. It helps us realize these are lifelong patterns, and so they're not going to probably change overnight, the patterns. Um, some people, uh, sort of, it's a type of, or at least moderate relaxation to realize that it's not their partner or their work situation or their current engagement with finances or health that are giving rise to these patterns of experience, whether it's blame or self aggression or collapse or whatever our thing is. Oh, gosh, this has been with me all my life. And I didn't make it up. Uh, I internalized what was offered. And then at some point, yes, I'm responsible for perpetuating it. But uh, my partner actually is not the one who is causing my abandonment issues. I see that now, you know, and that's very helpful for a lot of people. Not everyone. Some people don't want to talk about their history. I don't care. I don't think people need to talk about it, but I think it can be helpful. Um, but in my work, I tend to offer a reflection of what I think might be patterns of experience. Oh, when I feel vulnerable, I tend to dissociate into anger or into collapse, you know, like fight, flight, freeze type of things. Very basic. Um, it's maybe helpful to understand the origins of that style, gender training, family, school, culture, everything. Um, but uh, my work has more to do with not trying to change one's conditioned history, but inviting a challenge to one's very understandable tendency to be identified with one's conditioned history. But if we're not aware of what those patterns of experience are, sometimes it's harder to challenge our identification with them. So, you're familiar, I'm sure, with the idea of spiritual bypassing. Well, that can arise when somebody wants to just go right to some immediate sense of well-being or peace or clarity. But that doesn't usually prove very effective in the difficult ongoing work of learning to relate to these patterns of how I engage. From a therapy point of view, it's basically how do I engage with my immediate embodied vulnerability. From a Buddhist point of view, it's how do I engage with openness. They're sort of similar, but not the same.
Yeah. I want to talk a little bit more about that embodied vulnerability. That's like a pretty rich and loaded phrase. Could you maybe go into a little bit more on that?
Well, we are biological beings. As long as we are alive, we are embodied. And our culture tends to see the body, especially in Christianity, but probably some other ways, to see the body as the playground of the devil, or the lower realm of experience, or the location of primitive impulses that we have to struggle against, like maybe Freud's libidinal energy or something like that. But it seems to me that we will probably engage with our life more skillfully, practically, with less unnecessary suffering and confusion if we have a more accurate and slowly, maybe increasingly wide range of experience to draw from. And it's so basic that we are embodied beings that I think it's very straightforward that the more awareness we bring to immediate embodied experience, especially with some kindness, that we'll probably engage with our life more skillfully.
Mm-hmm.
Then on a more subtle level, because most people that would be involved in spiritual practice certainly tend to be identified with certain modes of experience. Often it's conceptual, sometimes it's emotional, but in either case, a lot of times, either in our thinking or an emotional experience, for different reasons, we carry a certain anxiety or even conviction that there's a problem. And it probably comes out of evolutionary biology because life isn't safe. People like to feel safe, but sorry, life isn't safe. But if somebody can train themselves to bring their attention over and over again to sensation level experience, they may find that almost never, maybe there's some exceptions, but almost never is there any evidence of a problem. If I stay in my experience of my stomach all being knotted up or my heart beating fast and just stop right there, where's the problem? It might be uncomfortable, but it's in motion. It's not permanent. There's no meaning to it, conceptual meaning. I'm never going to find a sensation, in my opinion, of shame or humiliation or abandonment or rejection. Those aren't sensations. So the more that we can keep bringing our attention into that very basic level of embodied experience, I think almost certainly every time we're not going to find any evidence of a problem. And so the more we make that a habit, a practice, a discipline, it's possible that we start actually having this confidence start to sort of seep into the texture of our ongoing daily experience, where we actually start having the sense, I'm not a problem. Life isn't a problem. I mean, I don't like to be in pain. I'm going to die. My partner is bugging me. Yes, all those things. But where's where's there actually any evidence of a problem?
Mm-hmm.
So I think that, again, for very practical reasons, it makes sense to train ourselves to stay in our immediate experience, our embodied experience, with a practice of unconditional kindness, because I think it generates this type of workability or confidence, unconditional confidence, maybe even some humor, some clarity, things like that. And so I think that what we discover by attending to and participating in our embodied experience, from a Buddhist point of view, could be sort of understood as an approximation of openness, or on another level, just one among many expressions of openness.
Mm. So if that's kind of the path is towards that openness, why is it that it's so easy to construct a problem? Like, what are the mechanics of why we are always invested in some internal drama and why we don't allow ourselves to just rest in the body? It is so rare, as I'm a manual therapist myself, and every day I have people come in who are just so disconnected from their immediate sensation that they need to pay money to have somebody do something very stimulating just to kind of get grounded in themselves. It's like, what is this problem fascination that we have?
Well, again, who knows? We're just
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
making up theories, but
Yeah.
it makes sense to me to explore the view that everything we do at every second is our best effort to take the best care of ourselves possible.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not uncommon that people will claim there's a problem, that we make problems up about ourselves. But I think we have another access to investigation if we understand the possibility that everything we're doing is just our best effort to take care of ourselves. But often it's not based on accurate information or experience. But anything that's a life form, certainly higher life forms, are going to try to protect themselves. That's not pathology, And so there's nothing pathological about trying to protect ourselves with having a problem. It's just that from a Western point of view, most of our fundamental strategies for protection were formed when we were powerless, immature little beings who had very limited capacities and were at the mercy of their environments. And so our young survival strategies almost always are pretty black and white, pretty set in concrete to a certain level, not so available to be updated. And so it would be like a little kid is scared, and so they go hide in a box and they feel protected. Yes, but the price tag is then they feel alienated from life.
Mm.
But I think any life form is usually going to put survival as a higher priority than improving the quality of one's life. So when people present their fantasy that they are a problem, I personally understand that as an out-of-date effort to take the best care of themselves possible. And so if that makes sense to somebody, then it's not like we have to discover some sort of kindness to ourselves. We just have to update our efforts to take care of oneself. And that's a lot easier to improve how we take care of ourselves than discover, oh, how do I move from self-sabotage or being crazy or neurotic to sanity? I mean, that's a pretty big
Yeah.
step there.
Yeah. Yeah. So is the process of this, is it less about changing how we are acting in the world and more about how we are perceiving ourselves in relation to the world? Uh, does behavioral change kind of come out of that, understanding more kind of spontaneously, or do we just not expect any sort of hope of fruition? Or Yeah,
Well,
I guess,
you're
yeah.
again in a familiar way. I'm hearing you present that as an either or,
Yeah,
but
true.
but
Yeah.
it's possible that as complex humans, that most of our experience patterns of experience are more circular than linear, and so I think that what we call change can arise at the level of behavior, of thinking, relationship, emotional work, and if you're into it, awareness practices. But I think that behavior often is most available and has the fastest sort of benefit. And then thinking is more difficult, but it applies to a wider range of experience. Emotional work often is very slow, but it applies to even more. Awareness practice, you can't ever get a hold of. You can't get a hold of awareness with thoughts or sensations, but it applies to everything.
Hmm.
So, some people, I think, will benefit from starting with changing their behavior. And then, if we are complex, non divided beings, then changing one's behavior almost certainly is going to ripple down or resonate and uh, introduce new feelings.
Mm.
Changing our thinking, same thing. So there's CBT that works on, thinking. There's behavioral therapies that work on behavior. They're all valid, I think. I just have a bias that if it makes sense, why not sort of cut to the chase and, as much as possible, address the level of experiencing that is likely to give the greatest potential for deep transformative change or
Yeah.
improvement or whatever we call that. But
Yeah.
no, I think it's sometimes when I've worked with somebody at the emotional level and there's some shift, they say, oh, yeah. Then I suggest they actually practice behaving in a way informed by that view on a daily basis. So if somebody has a history where it wasn't smart to assert their needs in relationship, I'd say, well, if you want, it's up to you, it's your life, but if you want, why don't you look for opportunities every day to uh, say what you want and expect that you'll feel selfish? Expect you'll feel some panic because you expect to be attacked or abandoned. So, it's probably smart to start in little ways and just say, I want this, I don't want that, no, I don't agree with you, or things like that. So, I think if we can look for ways to work at all of these levels, it probably is more effective than just thinking there's one way of working. But at the same time, we probably will benefit from having one of those modes of experiencing sort of be the reference point we keep returning to.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. So, you'd mentioned a few times the need for kind of like unconditional kindness toward ourselves,
Well, it's not a
and
need.
certainly helpful.
Well, maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I do think that there's a lot of people, there's a lot of aggression that I think can come up towards ourselves when we start to do
Of
this
course.
kind of work, and, like waves of just kind of recognition of how we've been behaving. And I
Right.
think oftentimes, and I know for myself, there is this like tinge of kind of like, oh, like, why are you doing this? And self-blame and denigration. And, how do you work with that kind of self-aggression and learn how to see that?
Well, it's pretty obvious once you've been working, you can probably feel it in bodies very quickly.
Hmm. Yeah.
But again, I don't stop at the display of self aggression. I actually experience that and think of it as that person's current best effort to protect themselves, to take care of themselves.
Mm.
So I'm not trying to make them not have aggressive energy. That would be dumb to
Mm.
not have aggressive energy because life isn't safe. But I think it's helpful to get beneath the out of date style or version of protection. And so the view that I usually invite people to consider is that anytime they experience self aggression or collapse or blaming others or whatever, fight, flight, freeze, that sort of thing, to ask themselves, I wonder what I'm feeling right this moment that I'm trying to escape from. Because I see that self-aggression as basically a dissociative escape from immediate embodied vulnerability. And so if we focus on the self-aggression as the issue, we keep feeding that. If we can go beneath it to something that has a more kind, workable, practical implication, I'm feeling powerless, I'm feeling exposed, I'm feeling like I could be hurt and I couldn't protect myself. Well, yeah, that's intelligent. But I just need to update my style of protection so that it actually works. So that's effective selfishness rather than ineffective selfishness. But basically, from a Western point of view, I usually return to the theme with people, either in the moment or as an idea, that anytime we're off into self-aggression or blame or anything like that, probably we're trying to dissociate from immediate embodied vulnerability right at that very moment. But if it's there, it's there. Maybe it would work better to train ourselves to stay present and embodied and kind with that vulnerability and see for ourselves, well, it feels like we're going to die. Yeah, our biological, evolutionary bodies say, we're going to die, get us out of here, get us out of here. We can't wait for that to go away. It's billions of years of evolution. But we can introduce contrast with our critical intelligence and say, well, okay, but before I run away, before I dissociate or come back from dissociation, where's the evidence? Is it killing me? Is it harming me? Is it damaging me? Where's the evidence that there's actually a threat to my survival right now? We have to do this probably thousands of times as a way to challenge our identification, in this case, not just with our conditioned history, but with our biological inheritance. The first three chakras, the biological chakras, we have to learn to have a relationship with them. We're not trying to bypass them, maybe.
Yeah.
But they are, the impulse toward self-aggression is probably a very important aspect of how we have protected ourselves for decades.
Yeah.
But now we're an adult, the world's not our parents, and maybe we don't have to continue a style of self-care that's probably decades out of date now.
Yeah. So is it safe to say, there's some people who might experience just so much self-aggression, is it something that you would say is like going to be with them forever? Or is there, it's just changing the way you relate to it? Or is there a lessening or maybe seeing it more as like a clarity, just for the people who are listening to this who like just really do not care for themselves, is there any hope or is it just kind of like you're going to have a relationship with it?
Well, again, this sounds a little black and white.
Yeah. You always got to frame it that way.
Well, you don't have to, but you can.
Yeah.
First of all, if I was working with somebody, I might reflect that there is maybe some black and white organization there, which is probably a remnant of very young self-protection strategies. Because when you're 6 months old or 4 years old, your mind works pretty much in black and white, all or nothing ways. So, and also eternality and globalization are sort of characteristics of young survival strategies. But that's maybe a specific example of a larger issue that a lot of people deal with, which is how do you hold both acceptance and improvement? And so, again, it's like, how do you hold self-care and care for your partner? How do you enjoy your life and save for the future? Our whole life seems to be involving what we think of as dualistic experience. Actually, it's not that life is dualistic. Our minds just work dualistically. But preferred way of addressing that is to think of it as a two-step sequence where we start with unconditional acceptance as if I'm going to be dealing with this the rest of my life. That's not about the future. It's about plugging up all of our impulses to escape our immediate vulnerability. Oh, I feel this incredible grief and rage. Well, I might ask somebody, well, what would it be like if you had those experiences off and on for the rest of your life? If somebody were really almost dysfunctional, I wouldn't ask that question because that could be too much intensity. But if somebody's in the normal neurotic range, I do ask those questions. But it's not really about the future. It's about introducing somebody to the claustrophobia of a complete commitment to our experience of being profoundly limited people. We're just a collection of limitations on a relative level. Awareness is something else, but so I usually would say something like, well, if you were living in the home you're living in, could you live there the rest of your life? I mean, what's the problem? You have water, you have heat, you have a roof, Is there some actual survival threat to you accepting your profoundly limited life circumstances? And most people would say, well, but I yes, but no, I could live this way. It's not my preference, but I could. Once somebody has accepted and stopped struggling against reality, then it makes sense, in my mind, to do the work of trying to improve the quality of our experiencing. It's just smart,
Yeah.
But improving the quality of our experiencing is different than improving oneself. And a lot of people get confused there, I think. So we start with acceptance and then do our best shot to improve things. But if we've already accepted it, there's no big drama riding on the outcome. So we start to do the work of improvement for practical reasons rather than identity reasons. And whatever works, works. And what doesn't. It's, we have preferences, but it's no big deal.
Yeah.
So if somebody wants, they can work on their self-aggression. Like I might say, look, realistically, when you get captured at this point in your path, your work, you're probably going to be captured for a while. So as soon as you come out of it, then investigate, was there some deeper vulnerability, some anxiety, some sense of not being safe that you were trying to escape from with your emotional drama? Just keep checking it out. It's not a belief system. Don't take my word for it. Check it out. But, some things are so deeply embedded. We're going to be dealing with this for a long time. But seeing through the apparent drama that there's something wrong with me actually can start to infiltrate the texture of the stream of experiencing we're having in ways that aren't like all or nothing. It's like, oh, suddenly I'm free. It's more like, oh, I don't seem to be taking this stuff quite so seriously, or I'm getting over it in a few hours instead of a couple of days, or gosh, I didn't have to yell at my partner like I usually do, or I had some choice about my behavior or things like that.
Yeah.
And so it's maybe a little bit like exercise, where you go to the gym and exercise. You don't exercise the rest of the day, but there's some benefit that continues.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so we practice when we're up for it with the hope that there will be some sort of ongoing benefit that we don't even have to be sort of paying attention to. We just, every once in a while, we check back and see, hey, are things improving? If so, maybe this practice is worth continuing.
Yeah. But
nobody's going to get saved from their human life.
Yeah. That's one of the things I really enjoyed from your book when you mentioned that a lot of people end up in that trap where they feel like they can't start their lives
Mhm.
until they figure out this like core problem, and then they'll like go their entire life just like trying to figure out that one thing, and then they like miss out on so much of their beautiful expression and engagement with the world.
Well, maybe it's not a trap.
Yeah, yeah,
Maybe it's just an out of date effort to take the very best care of themselves possible.
yeah,
But as soon as
yeah.
you call it a trap, then you're going to get focused on releasing them from their trap.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. That's my own interjection into it, my own interpretation.
Yeah,
That
I would.
I love the poking through. I find that to be really helpful.
Oh, well, good. Yeah, because
Yeah.
like in a similar way, I usually talk with people as if they're pretending to have a problem, and so people
Yeah.
don't like that. But oh well, you know.
Yeah. Do you have anybody who gets like upset by that, who are like really
Oh, of
committed to
course,
their problems
of
and
course. Yeah, and I'd say, well, it's fine. You know, I can't talk you out of how you're trying to take care of yourself right now. You know.
yeah. Yeah, it's funny. It seems so counter to a lot of the ways I've heard of people's engagement with therapy, where it's a very more about just like affirming and just like being a sympathetic, open, just like,
Right.
yes, yes, yes. You know,
Right.
I like that idea of kind of like challenging people, which I think is a little novel.
Yeah, we're not. I don't think of it exactly as challenging people as challenging neurosis,
Yeah, yeah,
and somebody has to be aware of something in order to avoid it.
hmm
And so it's not like some new experience that's coming from out of the blue. It's like if I am angry, there's a really good chance that underneath that I feel grief, just to be very simplistic. And getting angry gives me a sense of immediate power or control, but it doesn't teach me how to have a relationship with grief.
mm,
So I would say to that person, well, it sounds like you're pretending to be angry so that you don't have to be aware of and feel maybe some underlying grief. What would it be like if you imagined that you have a deep grief that you've been living with all your life that feels like drowning in sorrow or feels like no one's there to help you? And I just invite somebody to try that on, and it'll resonate or not. But I see
yeah,
most what we call neurosis as, again, an effort to disembody or dissociate from immediate human vulnerability. But we're vulnerable not for a problem or a cause. We're vulnerable because we're a life form with a nervous system. And so our vulnerability isn't about anything. Our basic emotions aren't caused by things. They're triggered, yes. So we want to work on improving that. But I don't think our fundamental human experience is being caused by life circumstances. But all of us want to, not all of us, that's a little all or nothing myself, but we have a tendency, most of us, to jump out of that vulnerable disturbance of being human and claim that there's some current circumstance or person or something that's making me feel hurt or angry or abandoned or something. Because then, first of all, it provides a dissociative distraction so I can ignore the more vulnerable experience that I've probably been living with all my life. And a good distraction is one that can't be solved. I can rely on it
yeah,
forever.
yeah,
So I hire a partner who specializes in being sort of independent and in control and self sufficient. And then I claim that I need more emotional engagement from them. But I'm guaranteed to not get it. That's why I've hired them, to
yeah,
be the apparent location of that disowned aspect of myself, to use therapy view. And so the more I can keep saying, oh, if only, or they don't treat me as kindly as I treat them, blah, 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 we're, it's just a guaranteed distraction.
yeah,
But then on a deeper level, if I claim that there's something outside of myself or inside myself that is causing my disturbance, then I can have the fantasy, if only I can fix it, then I can have a life without disturbance. I don't think so. I think we should count on being disturbed every day of our life till we die,
Hmm.
because we're vulnerable life forms. Life isn't organized around our comfort or safety.
Yeah. It's a hard sales pitch.
Well, luckily, I'm not selling anything.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't get much for those books. I forget, maybe a quarter a book, so I don't care.
Yeah. Wow. So, would you say that there's power inherent in really connecting with our vulnerabilities? To me, like as you're communicating that, I'm thinking of where compassion comes from and the ability to empathize with people and to sense into other people's struggle. And I feel like it'd be challenging to do that if you're not able to really connect with your own challenge and your own vulnerability.
Well, sure, especially because vulnerability isn't actually personal. None of our experience is personal, actually, from a Vajrayana view, at least. Um, but on a relative path level, the more we can own aspects of ourself, the more we can be empathic with, recognize, extend to that same energy in other people.
Mm-hmm.
If I can't tolerate feeling like a victim and I relate to somebody who specializes in pretending to be a victim, then I could get very activated because it's wrong. It's wrong to be that way. But the real
Yeah.
location is it's wrong here. Not really. I'm pretending again that I
Yeah.
can have a life without those feelings. But sorry, I got stuck with them somewhere along the way. Might as
Yeah.
well have a conscious relationship. Um, so I think that it's important to discriminate between personal power and interpersonal power. I
Mm-hmm.
don't think that this work necessarily gives rise to interpersonal power. It might help that issue out, but that's so complex and has to do with all sorts of things. But I definitely think that not pretending to be divided against oneself is a more powerful experience of being present in life than pretending to be a problem, pretending to be at war with myself, pretending to be in a state of struggle, pretending there's something wrong with me. If only I heal it, then I can show up. Those are those are basically uh, forms of the activity of self-absorption,
Mm.
and it's not a very powerful feeling to feel like I can't engage intimately with life.
Yeah.
But if we don't engage intimately with ourselves, it's the same thing, really. It's just a projection. We're not going to engage intimately with those aspects of life. And then we're going to feel more anxious when we have to deal with that or that gets presented because we're not confident that we can show up and try to take care of ourselves.
Yeah. Well, that's powerful. So, what I was surprised with your book, I feel like most people who are sharing Dharma-esque teachings, a lot of people talk about meditation, but I feel like you didn't really touch up on it. Does that have a role in this kind of work that you're talking about, or?
Yeah, I like Dharma-esque.
Yeah, yeah, it's you have the Dharma there. It's you got a lot of going on.
Right. Well, yeah. For whatever complex reasons, I don't like the feeling of proselytizing.
Hmm.
Who knows all the complex reasons. Uh, and I often feel a little turned off when I experience, might not be their intention, but when I experience people as claiming that there's an answer and this is it. And so
Yeah.
if you do this, you'll be free and you'll have a life of tremendous aliveness and vitality and
Hmm.
uh, compassion and satisfaction. Okay, maybe I think we're probably just going to have an improved human experience myself, which is very
Yeah.
messy.
Yeah.
But uh, so there's that. But also because my work has been as a therapist, not a Buddhist teacher, um, I don't. I think too many people probably have associations with anything that feels religious,
Hmm.
and so I've prefer to find language or modes of experiments or working that tend more toward practical and not ideological. So I try to stay away from Buddhist jargon unless somebody's into it, and then I, of course, make use of it. But uh, I think there's sort of this association that's very complex. It's sort of like, oh, I should meditate. Oh, but what's wrong with me because I'm not? Or if only I were to meditate, then I could have a life free of disturbance. Or if I meditate, then I'll get enlightened and nothing will affect me again. Or, all sorts of strange ideas. So I prefer to present meditation as just a support for a more important intention. And there's a lot of other supports for that intention. And to me, the intention is to be present, to be in immediate experience, because immediate experience is the only location we're ever in. It's the only location in which our patterns of experience arise and are perpetuated. It's the only location in which we can intervene in our experience. So I prefer to use language like immediacy or embodiment or where we place our attention, unconditional kindness, things like that, that sort of anybody could understand have something to do with meditation, but I definitely don't, I don't think I've ever told anybody they should meditate.
So you think it's possible that we can have a stronger sense of immediacy, like a more moment-to-moment kind of experience, maybe without the practice?
Well, of
I guess,
course.
yeah,
Of course. I mean, people have been maturing themselves around the planet, as far as we can tell, for thousands of years without what we call meditation.
yeah, yeah.
And some people just seem to be more present. Other people seem to be in a chronically dissociative state. For the people who are more present, it's not like they've been meditating, maybe. So there's a lot of variations. I've found meditation helpful with the sort of views that we're talking about, but I can't call myself a great meditator. I'm sort of a half-assed meditator. I've gone back and forth for all this time. So I'm not a poster boy for meditation.
Yeah,
But I found it very helpful. But
yeah.
I don't think that's the point. To me, one of the things that Trungpa Rinpoche said, one of the first times I talked with him was, he said, just be open. Because I had this elaborate thing where I could go and not hear any voices in my head, and I thought that was very cool. He said, just be open, And that has just continued to deepen as far as appreciating that as a reference point of a discipline. Is just to return to openness. And as we move along, we'll have maybe an increasingly deep understanding of what that experience is. But openness is available at any second. It doesn't mean we, for practical reasons, have access. If we're caught up in a big drama and we feel threatened, well, no, it's not realistic to think we. So it's basically, I think of most practices for quite a while as recovery practices, not accomplishment practices or prevention practices. It's like meditation. You can't prevent yourself from going off into an absorbed state of mind. You can't prevent it, but you can recover. Come back to immediacy, back to embodiment, back to open-heartedness. So that's why it's a practice. It's not an accomplishment. But the reference point that makes sense to me at this point in my life is just that what we recover to is openness, an experience of openness, not the idea. In a Vajrayana view, we could maybe say that Hinayana or Theravada, the reference point is immediate mindfulness or attention or embodiment. Mahayana view, the reference point is, let's say, open-heartedness or compassion. Vajrayana view, I think, is that the reference point is openness, but it's a disturbing openness. It's not a calm, peaceful openness, as far as I can tell.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. We are kind of at that point. It's like I could take this in so many different directions, but I also want to respect your time. Um, Thank you so much for this exploration
Well, sure.
and kind of getting me on the right track with some of this material. After listening to it for so long, you interpret things and then you hear in different ways, and it's been very useful. So I do want to give you an opportunity to kind of plug if you're doing anything, if you offer any courses or consultations or how can people who are listening kind of keep in touch with you?
Well, I'm an old guy now. I'm sort of working half time, and I'm not looking to build my practice or anything.
Mm,
It's
yeah,
not writing another book to
yeah.
advertise. Um, there is a website that a friend helps me maintain, and if somebody is interested, I do have openings that come and go, but I get more requests than I have space for, and I don't take, it would be nice if I did, but I don't take the energy to respond to everybody. So if somebody were interested, they could send me an email asking about meeting. I don't schedule anybody now more than once a month. And
Mm,
since I moved from Colorado to California, I haven't maintained my LMFT license. So now I'm just working as a consultant, not as a
yeah,
therapist officially.
yeah,
And so if somebody wants, they could inquire. If I don't respond, I apologize, but it just means I'm getting too many. And if I have some openings, I'll usually get back to somebody. And there's nothing open now, they could try down the road a bit.
yeah. Okay.
But there's so many good teachers around, who
Yeah.
uh, are writing good books and are uh, doing good work that nobody's going to miss out, especially if we don't connect.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I would also just like to, I mean, I'll plug for you your book Already Free. I found to just be, as I said before, just really incredible, a really nice synthesis of all these things. And it really goes into quite a good amount of depth too. So,
Well, if you liked the audio version, that actually came first.
mm,
And then Tammy Simon with Sounds True, she's the one I did the audio version. She asked if I would extend it to a book. So actually, I did the book several years after the audio
oh,
tape, and so the book is basically working off the transcript and the skeleton of the audio series. But I added a couple of chapters. I gave more like case studies. So the book actually, I think, is gives a lot richer uh, range of information if somebody is interested.
amazing. Yeah, I didn't even pick up on that.
Right.
Awesome. Great. Well, Bruce, thank you so much for giving me some of your time. This has been a real pleasure for me.
Well, Brett, thanks for inviting me, and I appreciate the work you're doing, both as a physical therapist or a massage therapist. What is it that you call yourself?
Massage therapy. Yeah.
Massage therapy, as well as
Yeah.
this podcast. That's great.
Yeah.
It's really this world is so confused. There's so much pain that it's just always great to run into people who are trying to be a benefit rather than creating more problems. So thank you for your work
Yeah.
too.
Yeah. I appreciate you saying that. Yeah, it's an honor to be able to have so many amazing people on. I'm just surprised. And every time I do this, I'm just humbled by just who agrees to come on. It's just like, okay, yeah, let's do this. All right. So we will let you go for now. Thank you again.
Okay. Well, thank you.
All right, everybody. Thank you so much for listening all the way through until the end. Again, that was Bruce Tift. If you want to support this show, head on over to patreon.com/21st Century Vitalism and consider becoming a patron. Really does help. If money is an issue, that is okay. You're also welcome to head on over to YouTube, subscribe there, follow us on Instagram, like us on Facebook. You know the whole rigmarole. All of Bruce's links will be down below if you want to pick up his book, which I highly, highly recommend. All right, thank you so much for listening. We will catch you on the next episode.